Hey everybody, this is Matt Atkinson, and you're watching Forward Gettysburg with Aaron Smith.
What is going on, everybody? Aaron Smith here with another exciting episode of Forward Gettysburg. Thank you guys so much for joining me. It has been, as the kids say, a hot minute since I have produced a video. And as I've alluded to in several of my other videos, I have been going through some personal things. I'll share with you guys. I'm going through a divorce. I moved into a new place. It is what it is. You know what? Life is going to throw you curveballs, and we don't grow unless it's through adversity. So I have grown quite a bit, and life moves on. It is what it is. As the Grateful Dead says, what a long, strange trip it's been. And what a long, strange trip it has been, my friends. But I am back. I am going to get back into it, start producing more frequently, try to get a video out at least once a week. So what have I been up to? Well, a few weeks ago, I went to the North-South Skirmish Association Invitationals at Fort Shenandoah, just outside of Winchester, Virginia. I went there to work for the regimental quartermaster, and I had an absolute blast there. There is nothing more exciting than hearing cannons fire in succession, one after another, and knowing that they were shooting live rounds. It was incredible. It was an awesome event. So if you guys have any kind of interest, maybe you're not interested in reenacting, but you want to shoot some period firearms, or you want to get involved in the artillery or something like that, check out the North-South Skirmish Association. Absolute blast of a time. I also celebrated my birthday. Thank you. I want to send a huge shout out to my mom, who got me some incredible Civil War related gifts. First off, she got me this awesome Hardy hat. I decorated it up with some brass, put the hat cord around it, and man, it is looking sharp. The only thing I need is to get a red felt circle to go right on top here, and boy, we are ready to head into those woods. Also, she made, hand-stitched, this gorgeous Confederate artillery coat with the North Carolina sunburst buttons. This coat fits like a glove. It is absolutely gorgeous. So with that out of the way, let's get into today's topic. We're talking about Robert E. Lee's tactic, the hammer and the anvil. So what am I talking about, the hammer and the anvil? Well, Robert E. Lee tends to use this tactic throughout the Civil War, at least the earlier years of him taking over command of the Army of Northern Virginia. What is the hammer and the anvil? So let's think about it. We have a blacksmith. We have a piece of metal that is heated up, and we have the blacksmith putting it on the anvil, hammering it. The anvil holding that piece of metal in place while the hammer is going to shape it. The hammer is going to strike that piece of metal. Clink, clink, clink. You know, so with that analogy in mind, let's apply that to Civil War military tactics. And we see Robert E. Lee. Now, Robert E. Lee is a very pragmatic general. Robert E. Lee, he tends to go with the maxim, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So we see Robert E. Lee use this at the Battle of Second Manassas, or the Battle of Second Bull Run, whatever have you. And at that battle, he has his army split into two wings, one wing under Stonewall Jackson, the other wing under James Longstreet. And Stonewall Jackson, he's going to start some skirmishing and some fighting with the Union Army at Bronner's Farm to kind of draw them in. And then he's going to take defensive positions in an area called Stony Ridge. And he's going to let the Union Army attack and attack and attack. And it gets a little dicey there, a little bit for the Confederates. But still, the Union Army is attacking this defensive position. Stonewall Jackson is the anvil. He is holding the Union Army in place. Then on the second day, Robert E. Lee is going to take Longstreet's corps, that other wing of the army, and he is going to smash the Union left flank and send them skedaddling. It is an incredible victory for the South. It is an incredible victory for Robert E. Lee. It is a testament to his simple yet genius military mind. I know, I'm probably going to catch a bunch of flack in the comments for that. Whatever. Robert E. Lee, he's going to use the hammer and anvil tactic to his success at the Battle of Second Manassas. So we're going to fast forward. We have Antietam. Antietam's kind of like a little draw almost. Then we have Fredericksburg, which is an overwhelming Confederate victory. Now we get into the Battle of Chancellorsville. And Robert E. Lee is going to use this same tactic at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Now, mind you, Longstreet, he has Hood and Pickett's division gallivanting down near the Suffolk, Virginia area. So Robert E. Lee is without a large portion of his army. But on that second day of Chancellorsville, Robert E. Lee, he is going to leave a few divisions to face the Union Army. Now we're talking 14,000 Confederates to hold in place 70,000 Union. Now, mind you, he is facing Hooker. He's facing a different opponent. He's not facing Pope like he faced at Second Manassas. But Hooker is going to be a little bit overly cautious. Hooker, on the first day of Chancellorsville, he is going to kind of give that initiative over to Robert E. Lee, a man who needs truly no invitation to take the initiative on the battlefield. So Hooker is just kind of maybe something light skirmishing or whatever, but he's not going to do a whole lot with his enormous army. Robert E. Lee is essentially holding this skeleton position with 14,000 men, probably 2 or 3 divisions. Meanwhile, Stonewall Jackson is making a flank march, trying to make it as discreetly as possible. And he's going to make this flank march almost 5 miles around from the original position where the Confederate Army is, almost 5 miles around, and he is going to smash the 11th Corps of the Army of the Potomac under Oliver Otis Howard. Now, this is also a prime example of the Hammer and Anvil. Those few divisions that Lee left, those 14,000 men, they're the anvil holding the Union Army in position. Meanwhile, Jackson, he is going to hammer the Union 11th Corps and the Union right flank with 30,000 men. Chancellorsville is often described as Lee's perfect victory. And I will give it credit as an incredible victory for Lee. He divided his army 3 times in the face of a numerically superior enemy and came away with a victory. But he did lose Stonewall Jackson, so maybe it is a bit of a Pyrrhic victory. Nonetheless, we see Robert E. Lee repeating this hammer and anvil tactic at Chancellorsville in May of 1863. So let's fast forward to Gettysburg. Hooker's no longer in command. Meade is in command of the Army of the Potomac, yada, 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 etc., etc. So Lee gets to Gettysburg, first day. Both armies are trying to concentrate as many corps and as many divisions as their armies as possible at Gettysburg, and probably not intentionally, not by design, but still Robert E. Lee is going to repeat that hammer and anvil tactic on day 1, whether he intended to or not. So, of course, we know beginning of day 1, we have Heath's division, Archer's brigade, Davis's brigade. They're marching. They're going to encounter the cavalry. They're going to push the cavalry back. And now we have Cutler's brigade coming in, facing off against Davis. We have the Iron Brigade facing off against Archer in the McPherson's Woods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then the armies begin to concentrate. So, on that west to east axis along the Chambersburg Pike, to keep up with his example, mind you, that is going to be the anvil. There's a lot of back and forth. The Union gives up some ground. The Confederates give up some ground. And it's going to go back and forth till about noon, 11:30. Then we're going to have Rhodes' division peep their little Confederate heads right at Oak Hill. And they're going to try to hammer the Union positions that are there along Seminary Ridge and Oak Ridge, that area, kind of where that short little observation tower is. You know, that area there along Oak Ridge. They're going to try to hammer those positions, but it's going to be a very piecemeal attack. It's going to be a very disorganized attack, so it's not going to be successful. Eventually, we have the 11th Corps. Oh my gosh, history? Are you repeating yourself? Yes, you are. We have the 11th Corps coming in on the right flank of the Army of the Potomac. They are taking positions north of town along that north-south axis of the Carlisle Pike. And then we have Early's division of Ewell's Corps. They are going to smash. So now the hammer is out of Rhodes's hands and into Early's hands, especially into the hands of John B. Gordon, one of my favorite generals. The more I read about him, the more I read his memoirs, the more I come to really, really enjoy John B. Gordon. Now, of course, when I say I enjoy a Confederate general, it's going to raise a small little bit of controversy. I like to take him out of the context of being from the South, supporting slavery, et cetera, owning slaves, whatever have you, and just look at his battlefield actions. Just look at what he did on the battlefield. That's how I like to judge a general. I like to look at them almost in a vacuum. What did they do on the battlefield? And I really, really like John B. Gordon. So Gordon is his brigade of Georgians. They're going to smash Barlow's, no, they're going to smash Barlow's division. The rest of Early's division, they're going to make attacks there. We have Doles is making an attack there. And he's going to smash the right flank of the Army of the Potomac, going to smash the 11th Corps. And oh my gosh, I'm getting flashbacks from Chancellorsville. And here we are. The 11th Corps is sent retreating through the town of Gettysburg. They're going to take up their defensive positions on Cemetery Hill. Meanwhile, the rest of the Army of the Potomac is going to start to retreat as well. The position west of town has become untenable. So whether Robert E. Lee intended for the hammer and anvil tactic to succeed on day one, or if it was just an accident, if it's just how his troops came into Gettysburg, it is going to be successful. So now we have day two. And here's where the hammer and the anvil is actually planned for the Army of Northern Virginia. So we have Ewell. He is on the far left flank of the Army of Northern Virginia, being the right flank of the Army of the Potomac. Ewell is ordered to make a demonstration upon the right flank of the army, and if possible, if deemed, I forget the exact wording, but if deemed possible, deemed necessary, turn it into a full-fledged attack. Meanwhile, Longstreet is to attack up the Emmitsburg Road. That's all Gettysburg 101. Now, Ewell is not going to fire his attack off until later on in the evening, around 7 o'clock, 7:30. Meanwhile, Longstreet's firing off his attack around 4 in the afternoon or so. So there's a gap of 3 hours. These attacks are not coordinated. And part of it, I think, has to do with Ewell maybe not being used to Corps command. Now remember, Robert E. Lee sends very, very vague orders to his Corps commanders. He says, I want this done. And that's all he sends. He doesn't send them a step-by-step guide. He doesn't send instructions telling them how he wants it done. He just says, I want this done. Let's do it. And Stonewall Jackson and Longstreet, they were very used to the orders being given very vague to them, and they could fill in the details later. But Richard Stoddard Ewell and Ambrose Powell Hill, who's now in command of the newly created 3rd Corps, they're not used to Lee's command style of these very vague orders. So I think part of Ewell's attack coming off late is going to be a very vague orders. Of course, you have positioning. It takes time to get men into position, and all these kind of things. They're going to lead to a later attack. Meanwhile, on the left flank of the Army of the Potomac, the right flank of the Army of Northern Virginia, we have Longstreet's attack, attacking with Hood's division and McLaws' division. Pickett hasn't quite come up yet from Chambersburg. There is one individual who put a wrench into the gears of the hammer being Longstreet, the anvil being Ewell. Ewell is just to make a distraction. Ewell is just to make the Union Army think, oh God, they're attacking on the right side, and divert some resources over to the right side. Meanwhile, Longstreet hammers up on the left flank. Not how it works out. Because of one individual, that man being, drum roll please, Major General Daniel Sickles. Sickles, as we know, he is going to move his third corps forward 3/4 of a mile away from the left flank of the second corps of the Army of the Potomac, where he was supposed to be. He is going to put his troops in the air, running from the north to the south of the Emmitsburg Pike, or the Emmitsburg Road, until we get to the Peach Orchard, making a sharp turn to the east, of running along the wheat field, and his left flank is resting on Devil's Den. So what does that do? That puts an object, that puts an impediment, a speed bump in the way of Longstreet's hammer. So now Longstreet can't attack the left flank of the Army of the Potomac without first dealing with the Third Corps, around 10,000 men of Daniel Sickles' command. Now, a lot of people think that Sickles is a goofball, think that Sickles was totally wrong and unjustified in moving his corps forward. This is a situation where I tend to look at decision making not so much in a vacuum. I tend to look at the individual not so much in a vacuum. So if we think about Sickles, first of all, he eyed this prime piece of real estate, the Peach Orchard, the Emmitsburg Road Ridge, if you will, this kind of ridge line that runs along that area. He said, oh, wow, this is a pretty cool place for artillery. And I believe Sickles was haunted by Hazel Grove at Chancellorsville, where he was told to fall back, and Confederate artillery were able to take positions there at Hazel Grove and pound away at his Third Corps. I believe that Dan Sickles, Berdan's sharpshooters, and some elements of the 3rd Maine, they encountered the right flank of Wilcox's brigade there in the woods, just on the other side there near the Pitzer's Woods, near Seminary Ridge and all that stuff. So Sickles is thinking, oh man, there's like the enemy kind of pretty close to me. Not only that, but Buford's cavalry, who put up one hell of a fight on July 1st, they were out kind of working the picket lines, working the skirmish lines there, and they were told to fall back to Westminster to resupply. So now he no longer has any cavalry in front of him to kind of probe out the enemy units. And these sharpshooters and elements of the 3rd Maine, they ran into elements of the Confederate Army. So Sickles, I don't blame him for moving forward. Of course, hindsight historically is 2020, so it's very easy to look at Sickles and go, oh my God, Dan, what were you thinking? But Dan Sickles, I believe, in his mind was justified in moving forward. So Dan Sickles is going to delay the hammer of Longstreet and the 1st Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia from striking. Meanwhile, the anvil, the attack, the demonstration doesn't get off till late at night. And that's something worth mentioning in itself. I've gone over several times in my videos the absolute military and engineering genius of George Sears Green and his brigade of 1,400 men on Culp's Hill that were able to hold off Edward Allegheny Johnson's division. Now remember, when we get into the order of battle, we have armies, corps, divisions, brigades, and regiments. So division is much larger than a brigade. Allegheny Johnson's division of around 4,500 to 5,000 men, they were held off by 1,400 men under George Sears Green. I think that in itself is absolutely incredible. I think it's a shame that the 20th Maine and Strong Vincent, they get all the credit for saving the Union, yada, 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 at Gettysburg, where George Sears Green was truly a mastermind in and of himself. They're able to hold off the Confederate attacks on the right flank. So the second day, we see Robert E. Lee get into this pragmatic mindset of if it's not broke, don't fix it. It worked for me at 2nd Manassas. It especially worked for me at Chancellorsville. It worked by accident on day 1 of the battle, so let's roll the dice and try again, and it's going to fail for Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg on July 2nd. Well, guys, that's what I have for you today. Thank you all so much for joining me. This is just kind of me getting my toes wet again. Maybe not the longest of videos, maybe not the most in-depth, but it's something I've been kicking around in the brain for a while and something I've wanted to talk about for a good amount of time now. Thank you all so much for joining me. Guys, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the support. Some of you have reached out. Some of you have found me on Facebook. Some of you, we've had some really great conversations. James of Project Pass, man, I know I owe you an article. It's on its way. I've been trying to work on it, trying to find some free time to crank that out for you. But you've reached out several times, and I just really want to thank you. Matt Callery at Addressing Gettysburg, you've reached out as well. I appreciate it. Huge shout out and huge thank you to Matt Atkinson, who has been just a rock of support through all of this, all of these life changes. Matt, I can't thank you enough, man. Thank you all so much. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please remember, if you're enjoying the Gettysburg videos, if you're enjoying the content, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to have some really great things coming up here. The 160th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg is coming up upon us very shortly. So I'm very much looking forward to that. As always, my name is Aaron Smith for Forward Gettysburg. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next one.